Good morning, everyone. On behalf of SCA, we'd like to welcome you to the third in a series of webinars on the topic of collections development. And today I'll be looking at planning and tools. And we've been really delighted to work with Janice Tulloch, the director of Janice Tulloch and Associates, on this series. And this is the third and final one. And I'm going to make a bit of a plug to ask everyone following this webinar if you could please complete a brief survey that we're sending out, because we'd really like to gather your feedback to find out how you found these webinars, but also to inform any future training or guidance that we offer on this. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the webinar, and I'll pass you along to Janice, who'll let you know a bit more about her background and what to expect today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Victoria. I'm hoping that you can all see me. I'm just going to try and get myself. Great. Okay, brilliant. I'm hoping that you can all see me fine and hear me. Thanks for joining me this morning. My name is Janice and I'm an archives and heritage consultant, which means I get to work with lots of different archive services and organisations. And one of my roles is to provide a different viewpoint on challenges that archive services might be facing, and to support them in developing audiences, fundraising, and in managing collections. Relevant to today's subject, I was a co-consultant on the project to develop the UK Archive Service Accreditation Standard, and I now sit on the accreditation committee. I've also worked on reviewing collections from across the UK, assessing significance and planning collections management procedures and processes. Today is the third of 3 webinars for the Scottish Council on Archives, and the third time that you get to join me in these wonderful surroundings. That is not my house, I feel I have to say this, it's a National Trust library. But by the end of the 3 sessions, I hope that we'll be able to have begun to think about what you need to have in place for collections development for an archive, and have some first steps in place to act. So the session will be a mix of an introduction by me, case studies by Archive Service, a discussion and questions and answers. We're a fairly big group today, but we'll try and make it as interactive as possible. I will just share my screen now. If I just get that up. Let me just do that. Okay. It's also worth saying that we will use the chat box, so you might wish to introduce yourself in the chat box to the side. If you've never used Zoom before, you'll go to the bottom of your screen on most mechanisms, and you'll be able to find the chat box. You'll be able to click and bring the chat box up there. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in that chat box, and use that if you have any questions or queries, or if there are things that you'd like to contribute, because we always learn so much more from each other than you do from the person who's at the front, technically, to talk to by talking to each other. So yes, ask any questions there and add any information and make any suggestions. We'll also use some breakout groups to discuss any particular questions. One way that I like to make sure that you're all still awake, really, but also to enable us to understand where we're all coming from, is to use a tool called menti.com. So you might find it useful to have that open. If I open that now, if you go to menti.com and use the code, you'll find that you will be asked this question: what's for dinner tonight? And I'm a very nosy person, and I'd love you to type in what you're going to have for dinner tonight. For any Scousers in the room, that's tea. That's what we would call for dinner. We would say tea. What's for tea tonight? But yes, for the rest of you, what's for dinner tonight? And if you type that in, you should be able to start bringing that up. Okay. Right. As yet undefined food. Oh my goodness, how can you even start the day without not knowing what you're having for your tea? Lasagna, I'm up for. Thai green curry, stew. Oh, sausage and mash. You can't go wrong with sausage and mash on a cold day. Seafood stew is extremely impressive. Smoked haddock chowder, risotto, feta salad. Chicken tikka masala, I like it. And I like the idea of fridge scraps. That's something that we would definitely love in this house. Chicken soup, definitely another one for today's weather. Brilliant. Well, you can see that's working already, and that's a really good way for us to chat to each other and to contribute. A bit worried about the person that says they're having gruel. Lockdown in the UK is not the point to be having gruel. I insist that you have something a little bit more interesting. But I'm up with the macaroni cheese and the mushroom stroganoff. Brilliant. Okay. Wonderful. So let me just change that over. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to be doing and talking about today. In today's session, we're going to be looking at how to write a collections plan, how to develop some more knowledge about collections, how to approach reading, writing the plan, and then how to talk about delivering the plan. Because if you've been to any of my other seminars, you'll know that there's absolutely no point writing a plan if you don't actually do anything with it. We'll be joined by my colleagues from the University of Nottingham and from Unilever Archives to talk through their approaches to delivering collections development plan, particularly developing collections and linking in with their communities. So we've talked about those concepts in the previous sessions. There'll also be the opportunities to follow up the sessions with chats with accredited archive services who've looked at some of these issues before, and to participate in an informal discussion. So the overview then, we'll talk about the process, we'll review some of the concepts that we've talked about, talk about the process of developing a collections development plan, look at some of the tools. Some of them I'll look at in a bit more detail than others, because some of them you as archive professionals will have come across before. Then you get a chance to share your experience with others. We'll then touch on deaccessioning and disposal, give you just a hint of my thoughts on working with communities, and then we'll hear from our 2 case study examples. So that's our plan for the session. Really important then to review the sorts of things that we've talked about in the previous sessions. And one of the first things I wanted to just make sure that we were all on the same page about was the difference between policies, plans and procedures. And policies are about these overall intentions, the strategic way that you are intending to go, the overall headings, and how they're expressed. Plans, and that's what we're talking about today, these are about the forward-looking documents. These are about how you will deliver those policies. So my policy might be for the business that, for my business, I might have a policy that I want to do more work with football archives, because that's something I enjoy. My plan might be that in 2021 I contact every Premier League club and ask them, do they want an archive consultant? That isn't my plan, by the way, but it's about looking what are the actions needed to what are the objectives I want to achieve, and what are the actions that I need to achieve those objectives, so that they all tie together. And the important point about these is that they lead onto each other. So the policy leads onto the plan, and the plan leads onto the procedures. And the other important thing that we shouldn't have to think about, but we're just as fallible as everybody else, these should be signed, dated and approved documents with review dates. And they should all tie back in with the mission of your organisation and the community that you're set to serve. Just to give a rerun on collections development then, because it's a terminology that doesn't often get used in the archive sector, but is used very strongly in archive service accreditation. And that's because archive service accreditation is structured to tie into PAS 197, the publicly available specification that describes how you manage cultural objects. It gives you a way of talking about collections management across museums, libraries and archives. So this talks about collections development, including looking at where the gaps are and prioritising future collections. Developing knowledge about those collections, actually that's in a process that probably comes first before you identify the gaps. Developing your collection policy, or what used to be called maybe a collecting policy. Issues around appraisal, deaccessioning and disposal, what plans are for acquisition and for rationalisation. So what would be the process then, thinking about your service and how, or a service you've worked in before, and what sort of planning is in place to deliver on these areas, and how would you go about it? There's some really useful guidance from the National Archives on how to write a collections development policy and plan. It doesn't give you a structure, it gives you a way of applying that. And it talks about saying, always set the context, because the context is different for every archive service. Just looking at the two examples we're going to talk about today, a university and a multinational corporation, they're going to be very different contexts in which they work. Identify areas where more information is needed. Identify priority actions rising from the collection development policy. So areas where more information is needed might be about your collections, it might be about the organisation within which the plan sits. Your collections development policy will have started to identify some priority actions. And then there'll be maybe some other policies and plans within your organisation that show that there are priorities that your organisation needs to tie into. So often when I'm working with organisations, they say the most important agenda for our organisation is well-being, or it is research, what we get in the ref assessment, what, how we can support the research of our organisation. And then how you make a plan leads on to identifying actions and opportunities likely to occur during business as usual. So what other opportunities might you see that you would just plug into that? And then finally, identify the resources required to deliver the plan and set some timescales. It's no good writing a plan if it's not within your current set of resources, or you need to go out to get some resources with fundraising or advocacy work, and then try to set some timescales. And timescales might be different for different parts of the plan. So you might have a section of the plan you think, Yeah, this is something that's within my control personally, and therefore I can set this very short timescale. Other things might need a longer timescale going forward. Okay then, next we're going to talk a little bit about the types of collections development tools that there are that might help us to particularly develop information about the collections that we have, collections that we might want to collect, and collections we might want to know more about, and to try and prioritise some of those tools for collections development. I'm really interested in which tools you have used, or any of those tools that you have used previously. So I'd be really interested to know what you have used going for collections development. Which areas of these do you have a plan for, really? What have you already got up in place for those areas? Do you want to have a go there and let me know which one of those areas you already have a plan for on Menti? Okay, well, we've got about 22 contributions so far, 23, and it's really interesting because that is exactly what I expected to see, that most people have a plan for what they're going to acquire, but not so much about deaccessioning disposal, very little about rationalisation. Actually, you might not have a separate plan for rationalisation. Developing knowledge about collections. So not so many have those. I'll just stop that share now. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do now is learn a little bit more about which tools you've used. So which tools you have used to look in detail at your collections. The next question then on Menti is which of these tools and methodologies you use to develop your collections and to prioritise collections. Some of them you might have used in different environments, and I'm hoping that you can see this now on Menti. Great, brilliant. So some have used functional analysis, revisiting collections, reviewing significance. Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. I think we've probably got about maybe 50% of you have used one or other of these methodologies. We will have a look at some of those in more detail and take them forward. Okay. So looking first about collections review, and this is something that I do on a regular basis really, and we talked about last session with the University of Edinburgh and how they take that process forward. Collections reviews is about gathering all the information about the collections and appraising it against the collections development policy. And it's really important to point out that this doesn't have to be for the whole of a collection. So Edinburgh, or the whole of the holdings of an archive service, Edinburgh are doing this on a massive scale, Edinburgh University, but often it's been done on a specific set scale. The first time we did this for Edinburgh, we looked at a very specific collection that hadn't been looked at in detail before. What it's useful for is helping to identify the significance, to develop new insights into collections, and to help identify some gaps. You can use this process to assess how far the collection matches up with the intending collection remit. Bear in mind that the archives collections will never be a perfect connection with the communities that you intend to serve, but it helps you to identify which are the greatest and the most problematic areas for you. Typically, you assess the items against a set of criteria and score them against an agreed scale. So you'd come up with an agreed scale that would match your specific needs. The reviewing significance framework that was developed by Renaissance East Midlands and updated by Collections Trust is a really useful tool for doing this. It's simple and it provides a really effective tool for communication. So in my example, I'm able to say to colleagues and to clients in particular, X percentage of your collection is in the highest band of significance. X percentage of your collection meets your collecting policy. X percentage needs reboxing. X percentage needs it will be useful for you for your research and development or for your engagement work. So what's really useful in this reviewing significance framework is there are loads of templates and assessments and support really for collections review, and they're all available online. I should also mention that on my website, on the download pages, I've put everything I think you could use for this collections development work. So there's a page of links to where all the tools that we'll talk about today, or most of the tools we'll talk about today, are available. And there are some links to taking that forward, some with further reading. So looking again in some more detail about how you would review that significance. The collections review process helps you to look at the current levels of usage, to assess the current standards of care, to review the priorities. And there's an example there from their templates, where for each area or each unit, so that could be by box, it could be by collection, it could be by envelope even, depending on what level you're going to do, you assess each area against the table that you've been put together. Another tool that I think some of you have already talked about having used was documentation strategy, and this is defined by Helen Willis Samuels as being an approach that assures the documentation of an ongoing issue, activity, or geographic area. So that sounds like definitely what we will be looking for to try and plan in our collection development, collecting in particular, and that's what we're focusing on today. She talks about there being 4 activities, identifying the topic, looking at the administrative area, looking at the available documentation, what do you already have that meets this subject? And then selecting and placing the documentation within an appropriate repository. The key thing about this is it's starting with an investigation of the topic to be documented and the information required to record the topic adequately. It feels like this is fine for a new collection, but it's going to be difficult to use within a collection that's already established. It's worth pointing out that On the Record, the initiative led by the National Archives, used this strategy. We all will have touched on previously using functional analysis, and it's really useful to help guide selection and to ensure that the organisations retain adequate information about a specific area or a topic or a process that's been dispersed throughout. So identifying those primary functions particularly might be useful in a business organisation or in a local government organisation going forward. The next one many of you will have used before as well, developed by the Minnesota Historical Society to develop collections of business records. It's a combination of several archival approaches, including documentation strategy and appraisal and functional analysis. And it's a multi-step process consisting of these 6 key activities. Really quite useful for what we're talking about in prioritising where you're going to be getting your collecting and building that into your planning processes. The next one to mention then is revisiting collections. And you might think, if you know this methodology, why she used this in a session on collections development and on and not on something on collections information. And that's because for publicly facing organisations, involving people in collections development planning should be something you should consider, and finding ways to do that can be tricky. Revisiting collections could provide us that, even though it's not specifically designed to support developing collections. The principles and the processes behind this methodology could be useful. It's not something I've used, but I think it could be very useful, and I'd love to hear from you if you have used this in developing collections and prioritising collections. The revisiting collections helps archive services to examine collections in partnership with communities and with experts, so that you're not just looking at a collection on its own. You're getting those that might have worked in the shipyard to help you to examine and identify what particular collections are and how important specific plans are, for example. It helps you develop new ways of working with community groups, providing that new perspectives. You know, right at the start of this process, we had a presentation from the Reggae Archive down in Brent, and they talked to us about how they developed that really close relationship with their community that helped them to plug a gap in their collecting and to understand what was really important about that community. So that new perspective is really important, and getting that can only come from community groups and experts. And the process helps you to enable that, gathering that new information and embed it in the finding aids. And whichever method you decide to use to learn more about your collections, it's no good just getting all the information. You need to then compare this to your current collections and to consult with others. You know, what other collections are there that you need to assess against? I've drawn this little picture here of how my thought processes are going in this work, how you would use that collections analysis and review, and how it will feed into those priority collecting areas along with the mission and the community that you're designed to serve. You've identified those priority collecting areas, and that's what then goes into your collections development plan, and the development of that is really important. Okay, well, you've listened to me for a little while talking about collections development tools and a range of different ways. It'd be really interesting to know how else you have reviewed collections. I'm going to send you to some breakout rooms now to talk those through. We are a big group, so I'm going to send you to quite a few breakout rooms, and I will send the question to you as well. But what would be really good is if one of you could be in the group, could be the scribe for the group, and try and gather in how you review your collections and how you have identified where gaps are and identified where your priorities are, and how you've brought together all these really competing priorities. I'll give you about 10-15 minutes to do that, and I'll pop in to the breakout rooms to see how you're getting on. So yeah, if you could feed that back in the chat, that would be really useful, so everyone else gets a chance to hear what you're talking about. Great, have fun. Great. I think there were some really interesting discussions to be had in some of those rooms, comparing tools that people have used and difficulties then developing and delivering those, reaching those priority groups that you've reached, and sharing tools and tips. It'd be great if you had in really useful insights and ideas if you put them in the chat box. And it's really encouraging that you are already acting on things that we talked about in the two previous sessions. So thank you. That's always very encouraging for me to hear about that. Okay, so yeah, please do feel free to chat in that box and to make those contributions and share, because some of you have had some really interesting ideas and discussions between the two groups. I'm just going to move us on now to talking about, oh, if I can just talk that, yeah, there we go. Giving you just a quick overview of the process, or the recommended process of deaccessioning and disposal, because this is something that certainly when I was training as an archivist, which probably quite a long time ago now, wasn't something that we were taught how to deliver. The image in front of you comes from the guidance from the National Archives of England and Wales, and it gives you just 3 steps really towards developing your policy, your plan on deaccessioning and disposal. And again, it's about having this tools and building blocks in place and making sure that they all tie back to the policy and the mission and the community that you're designed to serve. It talks about reappraisal and retrospectively appraising collections against the collections development policy, then identifying material, but then also enacting that disposal. So trying to use a disposal decision tree that is in the guidance to look at where the disposal destination should be. So there's some support there that I think is really quite useful to give you an idea of where you're going to go with that. And that might be the sort of thing you'd want to put in your policy and your plan for deaccessioning and disposal. I always think it's really important to make sure that you've got that decision at a senior level for either the disposal or for the policy to be in place. And then communicating that with stakeholders. I don't think we've got anyone here from any of the libraries that have been involved, but some libraries in the past have had a lot of bad publicity through not communicating with stakeholders why they deaccession science textbooks from the 1950s, which are no use to anybody anymore. So communication with stakeholders is really important. Some chat going on in the box here. One group talked about a quarterly review of holdings, assessing the preservation requirements and cataloguing backlogs. Brilliant. Developing 18 criteria in 4 areas to that's just jumped up, to assess our collections. One group talked about the different way to assess the gaps in the collections, either from previous requests or inquiries from different teams. Brilliant, yeah. A team stock taking on an annual basis, outreach project with both users and non-users, and reviewing collections being a continual process. That group was also talking about how to assess the increase of digital items and appraise these for a future. That's a whole other seminar, I think, isn't it? I think that is one that is going to become, we know is going to become increasingly difficult. But I'm always of the idea that just because it's in a digital format doesn't mean we can't follow the same principles. It'd be interesting to know if anybody else has used some of these principles and processes and methodologies to manage digital items. One group discussed the challenges in a business setting, identifying the gaps, and then find out where the material is. Yeah, and liaising with departments. We're going to hear a little bit more of that. Importance of collection documentation for succession planning and personal relationships. Yeah, we talked about how time consuming that can be in one of the groups that we were in. And what I wanted to touch on then is really how to start that working with communities to plug those gaps. It can't be, it isn't a simple process to do that. And I just wanted to give you one slide with the top tips that I've found for working with communities in collections development over the last couple of years. And the top one's really important. It's probably the most important one, and it's about working with them, not to them. And sometimes that might mean that you might have a priority that you get no response from the community with and you have to park it. But you can't go in and parachute into a community. What really works, I've seen work in many places, is being a place and an organisation that people want to be connected to. So investing in your visibility, investing in your outreach, investing in your the activities, and then trying to work with the communities, be somewhere that they want to be connected with. I'll always remember Manchester Central Library when they opened up Archives Plus exhibition. They had people then coming to them and saying, why haven't you got our archives? Why aren't we in your exhibition? And that's what you want, really, isn't it? You want people complaining that they're not there. So that visibility. And this isn't not going to be a short-term investment. These need to be a relationship that's built through investment, and you're going to need to have a two-way process. So supporting the work of the communities and the work of groups that are working in there, and then being that change. So acting in a way that you want to see that. And then working towards the ask is a phrase that is used a lot in fundraising. You don't just go straight in and say, can we have our stuff? It's about building that relationship, doing all this first, and then saying, well, you do know we can provide a home for that. And it might be many years that you are supporting the care of the collection in the community before you work towards that ask. So I'm hoping that's been useful and that you have found that valuable. And I'm just giving a notice now that I'm just about to pass on to my co-presenters so that they can get themselves ready. Really lucky to be able to have two co-presenters today who've got different experiences in working with their communities and different techniques to work with their communities to develop collections and have planned that process. Really pleased to be able to hand over to Sarah. I can't see you on my side. There you go, Sarah. And enable you. Sarah's from the University of Nottingham. I'll let her introduce herself, but just to point out the very content cats in the background.
Hope they don't start fighting in a minute.
really happy. And Sarah's from the University of Nottingham, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how they've worked to develop their collections going forward. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Right, I'll just share my screen so I can show you the presentation. Okay. So you're able to see my slides okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Sarah.
Great. Okay. So yeah, I'm Sarah Colborne. I'm one of the collections archivists at Nottingham. So just a bit of background about Nottingham University. It started out as University College Nottingham, finally being granted the charter in 1948 to become a proper university. And we have a number of different campuses in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. And the university's really gone global. It was the first British university to establish a campus in Malaysia, and was the first foreign university to establish a campus in China. Both the international campuses are treated as outposts of the university. So lessons are taught in English. We have the same library system operating across all the campuses, and all the publications produced in the foreign campuses are bilingual. So also you'll see all the campuses have a lake and this sort of pastiche of the university's Trent Building Tower. So there's a really strong desire to kind of create a united sense of community across all the campuses. Manuscripts and Special Collections is a section of the Libraries Department. We're responsible for the institutional archive, but we also have very varied holdings, over 700 collections, a number of which are designated collections. So we try really hard to make sure that our mission statement aligns with the wider universities. So we say we support the University of Nottingham by preserving and developing its archives, manuscripts and rare books to enrich and inspire the learning experience, teaching and research excellence and public engagement. Our acquisitions policy sets out our objectives to particularly acquire the records of the institution and to enhance these with private papers of alumni and key staff. And we also say we acquire material relating to the history of the university, and we actively collect printed publications for our printed sort of university special collection. So looking at our institutional records in more detail, our holdings relating to the pre-1948 University College are much stronger and more comprehensive than those of the later university. They've been catalogued, they've been digitised, they've been used in various exhibitions. They tell a nice cohesive story about the kind of development of the early university. But unfortunately, the post-1948 material is much more scrappy. It tends to be only focused on the UK, and it's come about as the result of ad hoc transfers from the few individual departments or support services who are aware of our existence. Although the university does have a retention schedule, records management's not really being enforced, so there are huge gaps in what gets sent through to us. We have recently acquired a digital preservation system, but we don't yet have a way of collecting digital records from other departments. And so we've not yet officially acquired responsibility for preserving born digital university records. The university is currently transitioning to Office 365, but unfortunately not in a very controlled manner. So it's all a bit of a wild west. And we found out that our digital preservation system can't harvest directly from SharePoint. So for now, we're having to focus on harvesting the kind of published web content instead. So in 2016, we achieved Archives accreditation. This was our cake. The process of applying really encouraged us to revisit our acquisitions policy and analyse the gaps in our collections. Collecting the institutional records had always been a part of the acquisitions policy, but we wanted to be more proactive in our collecting, and we also considered it important for the university archive to better reflect the experiences of studying and working across all the campuses. So we did a real exercise of kind of collections review, looking at what we'd already got and looking at what was missing. We developed a collections management framework for our Archives accreditation application, and this involved creating a collections development plan to set out how we'd meet the objectives of the acquisitions policy. For the university archive in particular, this involved analysis of gaps for future collecting, and then the activities by which we just seek to address those gaps. And that included pursuing better relationships with the alumni office and promoting our holdings donated by alumni in order to encourage further donations. Continuing our pilot tri-campus contemporary collecting project, which aims to acquire material documenting student life at all the campuses, and engaging directly with students at Freshers' Fairs. So looking at some of those items from the plan in more detail, the Tri-Campus Collecting Project was initially a sort of tentative pilot in contemporary collecting. So there'd traditionally been a bit of nervousness about going out and asking for material in case we got given too much. And the project was given the go-ahead as it was recognised as a great means of raising our profile. And in the absence of regular transfers of records from university departments, we were really looking for those unofficial records and hoping that those would show us a different side of the evolution of the university and portray a more diverse range of experiences of staff and students from all the campuses. Well, engaging with students directly has always been challenging for us. For a start, we're based on a completely different campus to all the students. And initially, we weren't really sure what kind of material to collect that would show what student life is like. Photographs seemed like a safe option, so we hoped that a photography competition would be a nice way of eventually building up quite a data set. We needn't have worried about being deluged with material, as without the budget for incentives like free flights to Malaysia, which we were advised we need to offer, we ended up with 0 submissions. One type of material that we had successfully collected in the past was flyers and posters. In the 70s and 80s, a member of staff from the library had been rounding up university ephemera, which is how we came to have this lovely punk sock flyer. So we revived the activity both as a means of contemporary collecting and to give us an excuse to get talking to students at Freshers' Fairs. We were so relieved to find that flyers are still a thing, but we also often end up with other strange things like tea bags and sweets. Obviously, I have to eat all the sweets because we don't want those causing conservation problems further down the line. Students proved extremely reluctant to talk to us, but we came to realise it was actually much easier to engage with the Student Society officers. So we'd approach them on their stalls, ask if we could take their photo for the university archive, gather up any flyers they might have. it really helped us to have this written into the collections development plan. It gave us the confidence that this was a good use of our time, and getting to the Wellcome fairs is obviously feasible in the UK, but we haven't been able to replicate this for the international campuses. Obviously, we've had to be realistic in our plan about, you know, getting flights to Malaysia and China to go to their Freshers' Fair isn't possible, but we'll keep trying on kind of making a contact with perhaps a member of staff or a union sort of admin staff who could do that exercise for us and be our sort of person on the ground. We already had a selection of student society archive collections, so we would ask these society officers if they had an archive. The newer societies didn't really get what we meant, but for some the answer was yes, and it's been really pleasing to see the society collections that we have brought more up to date. So, for example, we now have some records from the short-lived GothSoc sitting alongside things like the much more formal Staff Cricket Club archive. Although the plan set out some activities, we also pounced on any opportunities that arose. So, for instance, when a member of staff got in touch to ask us for careers experience, when we learned that they had previously been a student union officer at another university, we set them the task of designing promotional materials aimed at student society officers, like this flyer. For the newer clubs and societies who didn't yet have an archive, we stressed the need for them to document the events and their achievements of that year's. That was something that the society officers really appreciated. Now, they're really focused on employability, most students are. We also sold the idea of creating a time capsule, which really chimed with the societies, especially the Society of Nottingham Guides and Scouts. They'd actually attempted to bury a time capsule on the campus, but luckily we were able to persuade them to instead give it to us to look after. And here they are with their archive box decorated with Snogs stickers and filled with photos and badges and even questionnaires from their reunion, in which they were asked to say what they thought they'd be doing in 5, 10 and 15 years. It was really enjoyable experience. They were so excited about seeing their box with its stickers on our shelves in the archive alongside all the kind of historic materials. And I think that's really sort of chimes with what Janice was saying about engaging with communities and be able to offer something that they want, a kind of real benefit that they can appreciate. Snogs even amended their constitution to make it the responsibilities of one of their officers to visit the archive and ensure that content is added in future years. And that's something we're going to try and repeat with the other societies, and it has the added benefit for us of more students coming into our reading room, and hopefully future repeat visits to kind of keep adding to their time capsules over the years. At the same time, we made big strides in developing a sustainable relationship with the union, who were also keen to engage with those same student society officers. They really loved our idea of creating a collecting box in the union building and even funded a banner stand to accompany it. We're also looking into establishing a digital equivalent of the collecting box to make it easier for the societies to transfer digital items. But we need to do a bit more first to find out whether the students have the same access as staff to Office 365, or whether we can give them access to some sort of put tool within our digital preservation system. Work on the Students' Union building really got the union thinking about their own records and filing, and as a result we've taken in the large archive of the Students' Union, most of which was being stored in the union shop behind a load of boxes of crisp packets. They've even proposed an archive policy now, which was approved by the Union Council, to ensure sustained and long-term management of the records of their activities and achievements. Success with collecting student materials from the China campus came about as a result of a placement we offered to a student, Yaoi Zhang, you can see here, during her term abroad at Nottingham. Yaoi uploaded Born Digital files to an Office 365 folder that we created, and then when she returned to China, she arranged for some student society materials to be posted over to us. She insisted that we had to have the material as physical items, and from the photograph you can see the amazing quality of their sort of union marketing materials. They're really lovely. Yari also wrote us a really useful report on what student life is like at the China campus. The material she collected needed quite a lot of explaining, and the student societies are really different from the ones in the UK. So this is an advert for the Model United Nations Association. I'm still really not that sure what it's about. Unfortunately, it seems that much of the student activity at the China campus takes place on Weibo, just as a lot of the UK students use Facebook. And that does make it more difficult to collect things like photographs. And we've yet to make that sort of same breakthrough with Malaysian student societies, but at least now we can show them examples of what we're trying to achieve and what we're hoping to collect. So if we think about the lessons we've learned, some of those are partnering up with people who had the same agenda of engagement, really made it much easier for us to achieve our objectives. So working with the student society officers and then working with the student union officers. But having said that, obviously the turnover is really quick. I mean, those student officers are only in place for a year. So it's really important to try and embed any good practices into policies and constitutions. New technologies can provide new tools for collections development. So being able to preserve the websites or key pages of the union or student societies in China and Malaysia websites means that we're able to demonstrate our interest in their activities, even if we're unable to actually strike up a relationship with them in person. You know, we have tried with Malaysia, but you often send out emails and never hear back. So at least we can start sort of getting snapshots of their student union web pages and get some information in our catalogue about the societies that are on offer there. We found that the collections development plan really empowers staff of all levels to exploit these opportunities as they arise. A lot of our successes came about because the plan was in place and we could recognise the potential chance to make progress. And the collection development plan feeds into our sort of forward 5-year plan and annual plans, and we review those every year, looking at the outcomes of our activities to take stock of our successes and see if a change of approach or a new set of tools is required. And finally, we found that Archives accreditation forced us to reflect on our traditional collection development strategies and encourages us to acknowledge and address the gaps that currently exist in our collections. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. That is brilliant and really impressive. I mean, I did some work with a university archive earlier in this year, and they would love to be in the position you're in, because I think you've really started to, you know, you've really not started, you've really got a long way down the road to getting those relationships in place. The difficulty is they change so often, but with that agreement on archiving, then that hopefully will help you with the student societies and the student union in at least. I'm going to ask people to put their questions in the chat box if that's okay, and we'll take them at the end, because I'd really like to give Sarah a little break, and then we'll pass on to Claire, who I can see is at the top of my screen. Hi Claire. So Claire's from Unilever Archives, and she's just across the water as we're talking in Liverpool, across the river from me in Liverpool. So I'll pass over to you now, Claire, to give us an idea of the work that you undertake in this area.
Great, thank you, and hello everyone from the Wirral. I hope you're all well today. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see that. I'm hoping Jan will say yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity today to talk to you all about how we develop collections at Unilever Archives and Records Management. Pardon? Oh,
it's okay. It's sorted.
I'll keep going. Unofficially, I'm the keeper of stuff and teller of stories at Unilever, and last year I became the global head of UARM. And the reason I do my job is because I want to connect people with our amazing collections. You might have heard people call this their purpose. We certainly talk about that within Unilever. Like I say, connect people with our amazing collections, which are designated as being of international significance by the Arts Council. But I also want to inspire people about Unilever and our brands. And also a really important part of my role is protection, because within Unilever, we also look after records management and data retention too. You can see from the slide that we are designated, as I said, by the Arts Council, the collections, and we were also accredited in 2014 as part of the Accredited Archive Service at the TNA, and re-accredited, thankfully, last summer as well. So re-accreditation by Teams, I think it was, which was a different experience as well for all of us. But anyway, that was really good news on our part to retain that. So what I'm going to do today is take you through some case studies of how we develop our collections at Unilever. But first off, I'm just going to show you this little infographic. Lovely. So what you can see from that is that our roots are Anglo-Dutch, and last year as a company we celebrated our 90th birthday. However, we're made up of many companies and lots of those predate those 90 years. So we're called a fast-moving consumer goods company, or FMCG for short. And as you can see from that infographic, some of those brands you may know better than our company name. We've got over 400 different brands in our portfolio, and I'm pretty confident that you've probably used one of our brands today. Thinking about Unilever Art Archives and Records Management, so we're a team that's based in the UK, the northwest of England, and from July last year we also welcomed our Dutch colleagues as well. So we're a combined archives and records management team, and we have about 20 kilometres of records and about 20 terabytes of data, or like 20, and that's held in our digital archive system. Our mission is to support Unilever to manage its records efficiently in order to comply with legal requirements, and then also to ensure that records of historical value are preserved as well. So that's part of our collections development policy. The team are a mix of professionally qualified and support staff as well. And our collections range from parchment deeds in the 13th century, which surprises a lot of people, right the way through to born digital content. So I'm already waiting for Unilever's annual reports and accounts, which are going to be announced tomorrow. I'm waiting for those to come in, and then they'll be added to the digital archive as well. However, with a company the size and scale and complexity of Unilever, it's not possible to collect everything, and nor do we have complete coverage yet. Our best practice manual kind of is our baseline that underpins everything that we do with our collections, and our collections development policy is an important part of that. So we collect records primarily from the UK and Ireland, but also now Benelux. And then by virtue of the fact that our global head office is in London and our global divisions, of which there are 3, are based in both Rotterdam and London, we also collect global records. So records created by global departments, global functions and global brand teams. We have had to change our collections policy recently, and that was to cover the fact that we were then taking in some records from overseas. And we have had a couple of examples over the past couple of years where records were at risk at a different part of the business, and rather than have them be at risk, they were transferred to our storage facility in Port Sunlight. So our primary community, we're talking about community a lot today, is the company, but we do an awful lot with our external communities as well, whether they be schools, museums, other archives. And I think it's also important to reflect on the fact that there may also be other organisations that have a collecting policy that is similar to our own. So for example, in Port Sunlight, which is where the UK Archive and team are based, we work very closely with Port Sunlight Village Museum to make sure that our collecting policies are complementary and are not kind of like competing with each other as well, because we both collect material relating to Port Sunlight itself. So I just wanted to flag that up as a kind of awareness point. But let me take you through our 4 case studies and how that all kind of looks. Oh. Okay, so first up, a couple of years ago, we commissioned some research that was to look at gaps in our collections, because we knew from the 1970s onwards, there were some gaps starting to appear. And, you know, that can be to do with a number of factors, for example, the removal of typing pools, the proliferation of computers, people being able to save their own documents. Even now, you know, the impact of the cloud as well. And the outcome of that external research was our contemporary collecting programme, which has allowed us to focus on different elements each year. So last year, we had a focus on LGBTQ+ records, connecting with those internal communities and also making sure that we were collecting material related to their actions and activities. But this year, we've actually been, this year, as in 2020, we've been heavily focused on what we've called COVID collecting. So even though COVID has had a massive impact on everybody, it has presented us with some good opportunities to collect material in a contemporary sense. So what you can see, the images here, now forgive me if they're a little bit blurry as well. So on the far left, we've actually been collecting images of our factories. So we've thousands of factories around the world, and we're actively collecting images of how our factories have operated in a COVID safe way. And then on the far right, we've also worked with our brands, because globally our brands have stood up and been part of supporting communities, external communities, and the response to the pandemic. And that can be through donations. So for example, in the UK, we've done an awful lot of work with FairShare, providing ice creams and personal care goods for hospitals that are near to our company sites in the UK and Ireland as well. And those care packages have been really well received. But then also our brands have done something as well. So the United for America campaign was huge, and we've actually collected a lot of records to do with that as well. And then in the middle, we've just got a little post that we put up on our internal channels to ensure and engage with brands and brand teams to capture the records that they're creating right now that are responding to COVID. So significant ones there are Dove, because they've done an awful lot with a campaign in the States with nurses and people in the healthcare professions, and also the launch last year in the UK and Ireland of Lifebuoy, and bringing back clean hands. And for those of us who know our Lifebuoy history, bringing back Lifebuoy, which actually left the UK market in the early 2000s. So glad to see that one back. So that's the opportunities that COVID has brought, but that doesn't mean that we've forgotten about the areas we need to focus on in order to bridge some of those gaps in our collections. So the other areas that we know we need to focus on are diversity and inclusion, which is huge in Unilever, and also in light of BLM, more to do with diversity and inclusion as well. We've also identified a kind of theme of veganism and plant-based, and making sure that we are keeping records relating to that. Campaigning protests. People do protest against Unilever. You know, it could be Greenpeace, it could be to do with water scarcity and things like that. And we want to make sure that records of those campaigns and protests are kept in the collection as well, and that is a gap. And what we also noticed, the 1970s being that kind of touch point, is that as we've got closer to our own time, we have very few pictures of staff and we have very few pictures of interior images. So we're trying to encourage people to send us records very similar to what Sarah was saying, so we can add those into the archive as well. And then finally, well-being and health and safety. So what we're actually doing with that plan is making sure that year on year we are adding those extra bits into our contemporary collecting programme. But one of the really important ways for us in a business of developing our collections is actually through profile, and keeping a high profile and maintaining that profile helps us collect records. That's the top and bottom of it. So on the far left, you can see Smiley Man himself. That's our CEO, Alan Jobe, who visited the archives in 2019. It was one of his first visits as he joined as CEO, and that's actually Alan finding himself in the archives. So you may think, okay, that's just the visit of the CEO, but actually the profile that generated for us internally was tremendous, and we were able to build a lot of connections and therefore start to collect records from different parts of the business as well. And it really helped me to position our service closer to our longer ambition of being the global centre of excellence for archives and records management within Unilever. The middle picture shows you some of the work we do with our agencies in order to place our brands in TV and film. So that's a particular screenshot from, it was just on TV recently, Back in Time for the Corner Shop. And you may think, oh yeah, so that's about profile, but actually that allowed us to connect with some of the brand managers that we hadn't reached previously. So, you know, external work can lead to internal connections. And I think it's worth pointing out that brand managers within Unilever change every 2 to 3 years. So we have this kind of constant cycle of renewal of educating brand managers about the importance of archives and records management. And then the end pick there is from our 90th exhibition that was held in London at the start of 2020, before the world changed beyond recognition. And we had about 1,000 attendees come and visitors over the 2 days. And we were able to really land the it's your story, but it's our history kind of theme with people in order to get them to consider transferring records and actually work in a much more proactive way with the team as well. So building on from that kind of proactiveness, we do something within Unilever that we call business partnering. So you have a business partner for IT, for HR, for finance. So why not have an archives and records management business partner too? So business partnering, the professional staff support the business and each of the divisions and act as a gateway to my team. So that will consist of collection signposting, talking about anniversaries, collaborative projects, helping our teams understand their brand purpose, which is critical to our brands, and one of the main pathways by which the company is judging brands as well is brands with purpose thrive. And also protecting intellectual property, so being able to support teams through business partnering to ensure that records are kept in line with our data retention standard too. So the pictures here that you can see on the left hand side, this is old school. This is a workshop. This is when we used to all get together and hang out with people instead of in our digital boxes. So this is actually a workshop we hosted for the Dermalogica team, because Dermalogica is one of our prestige brands, and they wanted to come and find out about the history of the company. Port Sunlight is the historic home of Unilever in the UK, so we're able to talk to them about that. And then also we did some hands-on sessions with them. So practical exercises, setting them questions, they had to do their own research. They had a really enjoyable day. But one of the things, again, that we will do as part of that is to promote your story, our history. And this has led to some other projects. So that workshop has led to other projects, including sorting out 3,000 records in a warehouse. That's on hold due to COVID. I think we might be pleased about that, but that's the kind of thing that we can be involved in through business partnering. But then also working with Dermalogica to give them recommendations, because they have an archive over in LA, giving them recommendations about how that material should be looked after in order to make sure that we can keep it safe, but also that it's realizing real value for the company as well. And then the image on the right hand side is actually an academic collaboration. So what does that have to do with collections development? It's a very different way of using collections, but it does allow us to build those internal connections with the brand teams as well. So this is actually a project from last year, which was a collaboration with Liverpool John Moore's Fashion School. And the students came in to have a look at some material from the archives. They were looking at colour palettes, they were looking at different brand adverts, they were looking at brand proposition, how brands communicate, and they had to produce a fashion show. So each of the students created their own kind of thing. And this particular example here is a mashup of Vivienne Westwood and Persil. It was my personal favourite. And it was aimed at kind of freshers who may be just going to university and using a washing machine for the first time. But also what was really interesting was they also did some brand history research on our website as well, on unilever.com. And they really tied in to the messages about less water and less energy. So thinking about sustainability and thinking about the planet, which is really important to us in Unilever. So it was really nice to see how our brands can be used, how our archives could be used as well, and also get those insights back from those fashion students, which was, you know, could cost the company hundreds of thousands of pounds if we went through an agency. And this ultimately did lead to us collecting records, and also that helps us develop our collections. And meant we also started to work with a few agencies that our brand teams use. Okay, so these are just some lovely pictures that I'd like to share. So one of the things we also do in order to develop our collections is work very closely with our mergers and acquisitions team, and also our legal team, because they have their fingers on the pulse of what is going to happen next in the business. And these images are actually all from a site closure. So there's two parts to this. One is being prepared for new acquisitions from an archives and a records management point of view. You know, if it's a brand or if it's a company, do they have their own archive already? What do we need to do to support the legal team to ensure the safe transfer of records, intellectual property? But then also we have to be prepared for disposals. And that's why I work very closely with the legal team, because we need to think of what would happen to some of the collections that we look after. With the new owner, if a company is sold, want the archive? These are big questions, and so disposal is an important part of our collections development policy as well. We also meet routinely with site services, so they will look at the different sites, offices and factories across the UK and Ireland and Benelux and globally as well. And they'll let us know if there are site closures, if there are site clear outs, and we're currently involved in a new future of the office or photo group, because COVID and the impact of that is changing how we use our office. So we're involved in that because that could be a potential source of records that need to be transferred to us, and by records that's regardless of format, so I will include electronic records in that. So these images here are actually from a site closure. It's true, whatever you read in a textbook or the anecdotal stories about, we had a box of Christmas decorations full on the factory site in Norwich, which sadly closed last year. There was a whole filing cabinet that just had Christmas decorations in it, so that gave us quite a chuckle. When we go out to sites, this is what we're confronted with, the picture in the middle. So how do we sort through those records, ensuring they're transferred into records management if they need to be, or confidentially destroyed, and there may be material of historical archive value in there as well. And then the final bit is just a really nice picture of the factory in Norwich as well. So not just physical records, but making sure that we transfer records regardless of format. So in conclusion, the case studies demonstrate how collections development works for us in Unilever, and it's a mix of profile and keeping connected, knowing what is happening in the business, and also regularly reviewing the actual collections and identifying those potential gaps. That is critical for collections development. And if there's one takeaway I would share with you today, it's that in a business collection, it's an active process. Our business lives and breathes, and so do its collections, and we want to be able to reflect that. So if you want to find out more about who we are and what we get up to, there's some external links there. You can join us on Instagram or Facebook, and check out the links on unilever.com or history, and there's a couple of apps that we've developed as well. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. That's been really useful. I have another client who I'll be pointing towards the recording of that, because they're interested in developing their own business archive. And if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. But I'd like to start by just asking Sarah, really, what do you think is the next step that you think in developing the collections with the students in particular, or more widely?
I think we need to make sure we get a nice kind of rounded selection of examples, I suppose, like a few diverse archives in, and I think those will then help us to collect more, because we'll be able to show people, you know, sort of the example, okay, we've got Gothsock, who, you know, a lot of people might think wouldn't have an archive, and really it's a few photographs and posters and newsletters, but just by having something like that shows that we are interested in different decades, different periods, and particularly we need to address the sort of diversity of our collections and make sure that the society archives that we've got aren't all kind of white UK sort of student focus. I think the big fear is that this year undoes a lot of that work. You know, there was no Freshers' Fair this year, and I got around that by doing web captures of the Student Union website and trying to capture some of the Student Society web pages, but I really feel for them this year, and I don't think that they've had the opportunity to sort of meet each other and talk about their activities for the year, really. So I hope this isn't a setback, but going forwards, you know, I think once you start, it's much easier for people to see what you want to collect and why you're trying to connect with them. So that should stand us in good stead, the start that we've made.
Yeah, that's really good. Really, I think COVID will have set back quite a few projects, but hopefully you know what works now, and what doesn't work. So that's the benefit, that you're not starting from nowhere again. There's a question here for Claire about them. Do you present to new employee inductions, or do you find it's more effective to reach out directly to specific teams and employees? Good question.
So I know there's some people who used to work at Unilever. This is the old chestnut. Can you get on staff inductions? So it's a real mixed bag. However, we did do obviously we've got a portal and information is available, and then we, through business partnering, we can share all of that information. And if we're aware of a new starter, we will reach out and do that on a kind of one-to-one basis or a team-to-team basis, because you'd be surprised how many current employees have no idea we exist as well. So it's kind of like a two-prong attack. But last year we actually did an induction programme for all of the new members of Unilever's board, because there were several new members of the board, and the deck that we've kind of prepared for that is now going to be put onto our internal platform for training, which is called Agreed, and you have pathways. So what we're actually creating this year is a UARM pathway, so people can find out about what we do. They can find out about why archives are important for protecting intellectual property, and the kind of typical things that people ask, as well as a kind of virtual tour as well. And again, coming back to that COVID impact, one of the things we did an awful lot of pre-COVID was hosting workshops and having people come visit us. Well, they can't do that now, and I'm not sure when they'll be able to again. So it's making sure that within that agreed pathway we can do that. But actually having a pathway means that we're going to reach a much broader audience. As a global company, we want to reach everybody. So I'm confident that we'll be able to do an awful lot, and of course promote that once that's available too. So where we know, we'll do it one-to-one or team-to-team, but we're also getting this agreed pathway finally off the ground this year as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to share with you all now just a final link to the downloads that I provided. Thank you very much to Claire and Sarah for their contributions today. Otherwise it would all be just dry, this is what you could do, and seeing things in action are just so much more effective and encouraging for people. And I think that's the one thing I would ask you to take away from today, is to encourage you to start to make the steps towards more effectively managing collections development, and in particular for planning those collection development processes and plugging those gaps in your collections collecting, and in particular to say that visibility and developing relationships is vital in that going forward. So thank you all for joining me today, and that will be the end of the session. Brilliant. Any more questions, send them on to me afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.